So as part of the presentation today, we would like to discuss three important things: that what's the value of blockchain? So I think what are their unique characteristics of blockchain that drive value for our societal impact, or basically value to the mankind. And I think that's what we meant by here. Humanitarian efforts are basically the values that this technology can drive for good for mankind. You can think of any either financial benefits or societal benefits or environmental benefits. So you think of any of those examples that directly impact mankind, their lives, their living, their well-being altogether. So that's what I think we would like to understand. So we need to understand what the characteristics and capabilities of blockchain are that can drive to the societal impact. So that's first thing. Second thing I would like to share with you is the examples, that real world examples, that where we are seeing the value of blockchain into the societal impacts. So that's and then I'll share a few examples that you might be appreciating in terms of where we can explore them. But there are plenty of opportunities in every industry you talk about, or every place where we go, either in financial services, or you can go into the retail or the agriculture industry or food, or you name any of those industries where we can leverage the technology for good. And then last but not the least, I would also like to share with you is that, yes, technologies are created in a manner that you are driving some unique capabilities to do some good, either for business or for society or for individuals. But I think we need to be, as you can say, good technology citizens, we need to make sure that how can we make technologies mainstream? And in order for us to make these technologies mainstream, we have to keep some principles in mind when we are trying to either develop the new technology, evolve the new technology, or even implement technologies that we have in place. So I think that there are a few principles I would like to share with you, as many of you are in the academic environment and driving and leading the next generation, you can say either the student bodies or the technologies, or even I think driving academic and governmental specific use cases. So I think how we keep those basic principles in mind. So those are the three things I would like to share with all of you today, and then we will open up for Q&A. So let me go through the value of blockchain and how it helps the humanitarian effort. So we need to understand what it is in a nutshell. You may have heard, many of you are experts on the call on the blockchain and may have seen these capabilities. So I will not go into the details of each of the technology side and I think overwhelm you, but at least having a fundamental and basic understanding of blockchain technology, that how really it can help impact the kind of things that we do touch the individual's lives. So first thing is understanding that blockchain technology provides a single view of truth. So I think those are very important thing. I'll go into the details of each of these four, but let's understand all of these things effectively. So these four things that we are seeing here: so single source of truth, immutable and tamper-proof records, which means, yes, you have the technology where you can keep the transactions records, which are immutable and tamper-proof from security perspective. And then also the participation, that we keep talking about blockchain uses in public environment and then anonymous environment. But I think where we see our day-to-day uses, our lives, I don't know we are ready to have those kind of environments. So I think we need to understand that how we can give permissions and then invite the right actors onto the network, that network that we are building. It could be a society, it could be a business network, or any kind of network that we build. And then I think we have seen that this leveraging these capabilities, we have seen not only focusing on these characteristics, but also understanding, having an opportunity to drive new business models, driving new changes that we haven't seen in our current environments as of now. So I think thinking differently is an opportunity that's given by or enabled by the blockchain technology. So I think those are the four things, but let's go through each of them one by one. What do we mean by single view of the truth or single source of the truth? As we all know, blockchain technology emerged from an underlying foundation of this application called Bitcoin. And we all know this is a technology underneath, and which is called distributed ledger technology, DLT. And what it is basically a shared system of record across the set of network members who are participating in that common network and driving the the challenge away from us, which is basically every member earlier used to have their own ledgers. So now you have a common shared ledger, which is having the same set of records. And based on the type of permissions and other things, you can see what capabilities you have to access it. But this is in a nutshell a distributed shared ledger, which can be used in a set of network members and participants that are part of a business network or a social network or a society network or any of those networks that we can think of. So this is basically considering the single source of truth. And then the idea that we all know that every transaction onto the blockchain network is encrypted. And also, before you put the transaction, it has to be validated by the participants on the network. So a consensus building aspect is very important, that you have a consensus in place. The transactions are validated before they are recorded onto the blockchain. And these, once you have recorded them onto the blockchain, no one can delete them. So that's the immutability aspect. Tamper proofing is obviously, as these are encrypted every time, and then there's any change you make is subsequent a block is added to that chain of blocks, so that you can trail and do the audit as needed. So that's the second most important aspect. The third thing that we would like to understand is the permission participation. We have looked at many other technologies that came like earlier, the first one of them, the Ethereum driven platform. But we have seen the businesses that we deal with, like financial services or many of our organizations where individuals are identities. I don't know we are ready yet to have all of our identity information on a public network so anybody can see. There are more vulnerabilities can be created by doing that. So we are not in the manner of anonymized transactions. We are not in the world of anonymized identity exchanges as of now. I think that might create more challenges in our society. So I think we want to make sure that technology that we use is having a permission so that we can keep the bad actors out of the network. And then information is shared in that network with all the members to share, and especially those who have the need to know that information. So I think given the permissions, we can manage that effectively in the network. So I think those are the four principles, three principles that we have seen. But then looking at that, how we can leverage these things as part of, I think, building new business models. Because I think the decentralization aspect that we mentioned, how can we look at the usage of this technology where we can find opportunities that either our social network or business network or any of those things where things are done already in decentralized manner, or if they are not done in decentralized manner, currently being centralized, and we do have challenge having them centralized. So I think how do we understand that aspect and enabling our day-to-day use cases and value from decentralizing that power, right? And those opportunities that are created with this kind of phenomenon is, I think, huge. And we have to look at those new paradigms. We have to look at new use cases and how we can leverage them. And as Professor Ahmad mentioned earlier, financial inclusion is one aspect. If we look at global world as one global economy, how can we ensure that people who are in South Africa can participate in the global economy, right? So because everyone is not having that centralized economic system, and we may not even know that a person in Nairobi would like to sell something on eBay. something. How can we enable those kind of things? So I think there are opportunities for us to think through that manner. What could be the new use cases that we can create and develop for human benefits or mankind benefits or humanitarian efforts that we might have? So I think these are the principles, and you can say, I would say, characteristics of blockchain. But one thing I would like you to take away from these four characteristics is what blockchain drives is trust and transparency. So I'll repeat that again. It's trust and transparency. Why would I say that? The technology's fundamental value is that you are bringing distrusted parties into a trusted network. These parties do not know each other, but still sharing and exchanging the information in a manner by leveraging the technology that can enable you to have that trust built into the system. And that's the idea. And then second piece is transparency. As we know, I think we all struggle that two organizations, two businesses, two individuals, two social networks, two communities cannot trust each other because there's no transparency in place. And that's the idea of ensuring that we bring that transparency into the system or through the system or technologies like blockchain to drive that behavior. So trust and transparency. And if we look at these two elements, I think you all can appreciate that trust and transparency, if we have that capability, either through a technology or without technology, I'm sure we can create a better world. We can create a better environment for all of us. If we would be living in a trusted society, imagine we wouldn't have to go through so many hurdles of proving ourselves who we are, proving our businesses what they are trying to do for good. Why do we have regulation, compliances? Why do we have all the different kind of you can say rules, regulations, and enforcements in place? Because of all those challenges we have in our society that are related to trust and transparency. So I think what we are trying to do here is, yes, there's a long path to go there where we will all be living in a trusted society and we wouldn't have to worry about anything, but there's something that we can think today and leverage this technology to start slowly and applying this technology in the use cases that we see that can add value to our day-to-day lives today. And here are some examples that I would like to share with you today. And those are food safety, food trust, right? Microfinancing, the discussion we had, how can we enable and bring the global community onto the kind of a common network or common financial network. Ethical mining, how can we have the ethics in place when we are basically mining from different places? We are respecting the individuals who are basically as mine workers, and basically making sure that there's a trust in place where things are coming from route of extractions all the way to the manufacturing and supply chain side. And then when we talk about, I think in as I started the call with, the kind of environment we live in, the global crisis, either disasters and other things, how do we manage those kind of environments effectively with trust and transparency? So I think all of these use cases, if you ask me, one thing is that keep those two principles in mind, trust and transparency. And if you think of those, you can imagine multiple different use cases, how we can drive the value for our mankind. So I think that's one of the things. But let's take an example of food safety. I will go through food safety example in detail, and then we can talk about the others one in a small, I think, pattern that I will not have to go through the details, as you can understand the fundamentals behind the one use case that can be applied. The technology can be applied in similar manner in all other use cases. So let's take the example of the first use case. Food safety, food trust. And you might have seen these characteristics a lot. So only we know that 25% of our consumers today trust our food ecosystem, right? As we have heard many news and other things, that even in our United States, we have almost double the number of organic goods that are being sold than acquired or grown in United States. So I think that's a challenge for all of us. We look at the food safety aspect, because we are looking at almost 1 out of 10 people who gets sick is, I think, an illness that may have born from food, right? Like we have heard earlier, the swine flu or the Ebola, or many of those things, either food related to animal food or the agricultural grown food. So any of those kind of things. But we have seen that as a challenge from safety perspective. Supply chain efficiency, because we are the consumer product goods. I think businesses are looking at almost 80% of them are still running their business on paper, and they are having hard time to find the efficiency in the end-to-end supply chain, so in the food. So I think that's one of the challenge. Waste aspect, I think we have looked at the food waste. Almost one third of the fresh food is thrown out, because I think it's considered from our FDA or and many other food regulation organizations is that it's unacceptable for human beings. So that's how it's thrown out. So how can we ensure reducing those things? Food fraud, because we know, for example, the seafood is mislabeled worldwide. Every 20% of those labels are incorrect. And even New York, we have a specific characteristic, 43% of those seafoods are mislabeled. So those are the kind of challenges that we live in. And this is just one example that's, I think, part of our lives, that every human being is eating food, and then there's a challenge related to food safety, food trust, food waste, food fraud, food supply chain. So all of these challenges, we look at what's the main cause. I think we look at this one is obviously the trust and transparency, because those are causing these things that we see here on this slide. So let's, I think, deep dive into this example specifically. When we talk about the challenge that we see is specific to the food safety and food trust. What are the things? Like if you look at on the right side of this slide, food industry today, who are the key players or key stakeholders in this food chain? I would say food trust chain. There are growers, there are retailers who supply these food to different places. There are manufacturers who package them, and then there are logistics companies who take them to one place to other place, and then restaurants where we eat them, or are individuals that we buy from these stores. So I think these are multiple key stakeholders and players. But if you look at the challenge across all of them, each individual is having their own record, their own set of, I would call, ledger in this case. They are keeping their transactions, like what things I bought, what things came from. However, if you look at this fundamental challenges, data is siloed across all of them. So the data and information related to the food produced or food item is still siloed. And then basically, again, the information that's being exchanged across these intermediaries, that's the second problem that we see, because I think information may be shared from one partner to the other partner in this network, may not be communicated across all of these parties in this network. Because if I'm an individual buying a food produce from a particular retailer, wish I had the opportunity to see the full things. For example, if I bought an avocado, if it says it's an organic avocado, is there something, some way that I can find out that this is sourced from Mexico, it was a organic produce, or was it inorganic produce, who touched in the supply chain before it came to my hand? So I think those are the things that we need to understand, that do we have all of the information? Many times, as I mentioned, I think the transactions and the information, it's still the paper-based. It's not digital. It's not documented effectively. There's no efficiency in place so that we can quickly track this. And that's the third challenge. And then we obviously know that as there are differences from the time when you collect the information and then you share with the other partners in the network. So that's second or last problem in this environment, because we see, even if I collect this information, how do I exchange efficiently, effectively across my network? So those are the fundamental problems that we see in the food industry today. But how do we solve this, right? So would there be a better way if it's an an avocado that has been produced in Mexico, the grower has put the information right, a record, started a blockchain record right there as soon as either by taking a um, high resolution image from that and then with some trusted information that you can enter into, and then that is being tracked throughout the supply chain, right? So when you look at that, the instead of having these independent systems, now you are on a one common shared ledger, right? Where the data is started from the grower perspective and now it's been being exchanged throughout the supply chain. And whoever needs to take an action on that transaction, either a delivery guy or a logistics partner has to pick up from the grower, they get the next action on the system and collect it and take it to the next place. So I think there's a in the entire system. And then as we know that this data, once grower has put information, it's immutable. Anything happens after that, whoever picks in the supply chain of the food trust, there is a subsequent record of those touch points. So there's that aspect. And then if there's something incorrect that is found in the system, it's easy to resolve that. If it's a dispute specific, oh, by mistake, there's a box of avocado that was not organic, inorganic, and we find the traces back, we can dispute that and we can find those things. So that those are the aspects that we have to look at from solution perspective, that how those characteristics we discussed in the first place, the single source of truth, the trust and transparency, permission, participation, immutable records, all of those things that we see here, and imagining the different business model. Now we are not looking at the same thing that we have been doing before. Everyone is managing their own ledgers and system of records. Now you have a common shared ledger, and based on your participation on the network, you have visibility to the information that you would like to see. So this is a fundamental unique way of rethinking the food supply chain and bringing that trust and transparency. And just to give you a little bit of more, you can say, what's the value it drives into this food trust example. So obviously you can look at the traces where things have emerged from, all the way from the grower, and then upstream, downstream in the supply chain, you can track those records, right? Certifications, you can put what, not to belabor the point here, but as soon as I mentioned, you can take a high resolution image of a particular, if it's, you can find by different ways, if it's organic, not organic, and someone has started from a trusted authority, the first thing in place, you can generate a crypto anchor, which would be a certification by default. And if that certification goes across the supply chain, you can verify against that certification every touch point. They would like to ensure the authentic source and authentic produce throughout the chain. And then insights. So for example, if we are leveraging effectively the technologies that we have in place related to RFID, or in general, the sensors that we have that can provide the insights, but they are tracked and recorded onto the same record, the blockchain-based record. So you can ensure that, oh, if this particular food was um, uh, supplied through a truck that was refrigerated truck, and this had all those perishable foods in this truck, and they have been being monitored. If something is beyond the timeline and they have gone bad, you can quickly trigger that action or information onto the system. So you can keep those insights alive onto the system of record. And as we see the other parties involved into this example, they can look at how they can grow this entire ecosystem with that trust and transparency, all the way from grower to the manufacturer to the logistics, and then restaurants or individuals all together. So I think I just wanted to get to the deep of this use case so that we all understand that how these things drive value when we think of trust and safety for social benefits. The microfinancing is the other example. So I think this is one of the examples that we see in the Twiga Foods. That's a company based into African region, and especially in Kenya. So there are about 2,600 food kiosks in Kenya, across Kenya in general. And what they have been doing is this company is basically taking the food produces from farmers and bringing them to these local vendors. So they are kind of, you can say, a logistics company in between the farmers and the vendors. However, they have realized the opportunity that sometimes they think that these vendors can sell more than what they have an ability to. But how do you enable them to sell more, because they do not have enough funds to buy more from the farmers, because they are living on day-to-day transactions. So they are buying something, they have money, they are just sending that back to the farmer or through this company Twiga to buy this stuff and then sell it. They have realized that opportunity, and what they have done interestingly is that, how do you usually, when you give a loan, you have to have a credit bureau and credit reports and all those things. In this country, in Kenya, they do not have these individuals or food vendors do not have the credit report and credit history. So we have worked on like M-Pesa or those kind of systems in the past, where you can have your phone-based history. You can look at those transactions and you can create, based on that information, your credit information to certain extent. In this case, what they have done is they have collected the insights through the phone about their sales on the kiosks. And this is one of the examples that how they have created a unique system where they could create a local um, uh, you can say credit system in place, so that they can provide loan. What we call is, it's microfinancing here, is the loan up to $30 each. I think that's how it's about 3,000 local currency to the each vendor. And about, they have given about 200 loans in 8 weeks. So that's the initial blockchain based, you can say, use case, where they have given 200 loans in 8 weeks using the phone and enabling the approval process and application process through phone. Everything is recorded on blockchain from the perspective, and releasing the funds immediately to the food vendors so that they can buy more. And as part of buying more, they generated 30% more sales and profit across the Kenya food vendors. So I think this is kind of, I think, an example where the microfinancing, how we can enable the technology for growing this community and helping communities in terms of growing them, bringing them into this the value of the overall economy, right? So I think that's the aspect of microfinancing here, that this use case I wanted to share with you. The ethical mining is the other use case that we have been sharing and talking about, and this is something that we have looked at in the context of, so cobalt mining is considered a serious pollution and health risk when mining takes place. And there are global incentives if you can have the extraction of the root and the supply through all the way to your own manufacturing site. If you ensure that trust and transparency, there are incentives given to those organizations. So I think in this example, you might not believe, but in 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 one of the African region in Nairobi, there is this cobalt mine where they are looking at kids are playing in the mine. People have been, I think, uh, infected with the diseases as they are getting to the mining efforts. And there has been a big challenge. I think there has been a study done in 2018 that how many people in that region are having severe diseases based on the mining process that's being in place, right? So I think, how do you ensure these kind of characteristics to keep that safer environment for us, right? So one of the example here is that IBM, Ford Motors, LG Chem, RCS Global, all of these companies got together and tracked this extraction of the cobalt. As you might know, I think cobalt is being used in many of our lithium-ion batteries, one of the primary metal that has been used there. So I think there has been even McKinsey and those guys have been uh, predicting that there will be 8 times more requirements of cobalt would be needed in 2026. So I think those are some of the characteristics that we know and how important it is, and where we use batteries in our day-to-day lives, and how do we ensure that it's coming from with a safe and responsible environment. So I think that's one of the mankind value here. How can we ensure the people and miners who are working there, they are safe while we are using this process, and there's a capability in place for us to track that into the system and enable the system to ensure those right safety procedures and safety measurements are in place. So this is a unique example that how blockchain technology is used all the way from cobalt extraction to the smelters in between who are purifying that and then bringing it to the manufacturers where this metal is being used. So I think this is something very interesting for all us to understand, that how do we handle responsibly this supply chain of this kind of environment. The last example here I have here specific to disaster relief. So I think one of the examples that we have seen in uh, uh, the the hurricanes that we have seen in multiple places, right? And then after that, there's a chaos in the system, all the way from the small and medium businesses to the insurance companies to the government agencies, or the efforts that are being put in place. And sometimes imagine the major problem. I would like to think of those two things again: trust and transparency. Those are the two things that are inhibiting our response to these kind of disasters. Wish we had a common, shared, trusted set of, you can say, information exchange in the systems that we can leverage quickly. Given the example, I think today's pandemic, wish there would have been a better view of what's happening in New York with the Washington, D.C., our administration department. Wish we had more of this, not just to the national level. Wish we had more visibility to where these things emerged all the way from a different region, and we could have been tracking that effectively, better, efficiently, and all of those things without any discrepancy in the systems. And these things would have enabled us to have a better environment to respond. So I think in this example I'm sharing here, so Texas One Star Foundation, Texas A&M University, working with the FEMA, the federal organization, and then small and medium businesses, they have come together to create the environment for how do we deal with the hurricane disasters. How can we quickly help individuals who are in the need at the time of the disasters, after the disaster, or even preparing for those disasters in advance. So I think bringing those systems and capabilities, so working with um, the organizations who are predicting the weather, knowing the things, alerting those things in advance to the insurance companies, preparing um, the the emergency response system in advance, helping sure the emergency response system is active before the things could be worsened. So I think those kind of things that we have to think through and enable ourselves from that perspective. So that's the example here. I would be able to share with you detailed links, so you can go through each of these examples and learn that how really that what I have talked to you at high level, you can drill down that how blockchain is used to help in all of these different actors. Because as I mentioned, disaster relief requires multiple organizations to act in harmony to respond to that particular challenge that we are facing. And today's example, I think we are seeing this global public health crisis in this pandemic, in which we had all of our systems and tech systems and records and information shared and in a trusted and transparent manner, we would have been able to better manage the situation. So that's the example. But last thing, I think one other example here, I would say United Nations, I think, as we all know, I think that's looking at the global perspective. There are multiple use cases we can talk about. There's a fighting against the climate change. They are looking at multiple global regions and countries where I think there's a more need for. There are droughts in the areas. How can we predict those? How can we help prepare the environment, the people and individuals there? There is like, there are refugees and how we can enable them, at least while they are in the not in the right transition mode, and then how can we enable them to have food for them, having the right money with them, and funding for them. So I think those kind of things. And like, we already talked about the food supply chain, like, and tracking the pig supply chain. So I think that's one of the use cases that United Nations is exploring. There's this UN Capital Development Funds who is looking at remittance of money in Nepal, right? And then in Ecuador, we have tracking the cocoa supply chain. So I think those are the kind of other use cases that you might see on United Nations website that you can look at, that how blockchain technology is being used for mankind value or humanitarian efforts. But as we move to the last section of this, and this presentation is in next 2-3 minutes, is focusing on the aspect of blockchain as a force for good. So when we look at any technology, as I mentioned, think of this technology, how can we be a good technology citizen, creating the technology for good and making sure the technology is right, right? So I think those are the elements of blockchain. And I would say the 5 principles I would like to share with you that will be helping us create that trust and transparency and real value for our society, for our businesses altogether. First one is, obviously, we know open is better. So we all know, I think, this aspect. And very simple example, as many of you are in the technology side, we know that Linux is one of the example as a technology. I think 70% of the enterprises we are using cloud as of now. So 70% of the cloud deployments for enterprises are based on Linux. So that's very simple example. Linux is an open source technology, as we all know. So given that kind of example, using blockchain, developing blockchain as part of, I think, creating the innovation. So keeping that notion in mind, I think we think keeping open source technology, open source contribution is very important for us to ensure that innovation going. If we make it proprietary, I think it will shut down some of our innovations, creative thinking in the technology. So that's one aspect. Second thing is we need to look at permission. Doesn't mean that it's private, because many times people think that you have permission ledger, you have permission blockchain. It's not basically private blockchain. It is an aspect, because I think the advantage we have with this is that environment we live in, we need to know who are the good actors, who are the bad actors. I can't have all of my personal, my financial information out in a public network. I'm not ready yet. So we have to understand our society and business and those kind of needs as of now, that we have to have the permission in place. So that's the value. We can release, even in a trusted network, I can release the permissions and make it, I think, within that network, people do not have to get the permission. So I think it's basically what kind of, what levels of trust I set in my network. So I think that's how you can manage it. Governance is a team sport. So I think that's one of the other aspects that we keep in mind. Blockchain is a team sport. And in this case, the participants in the network should have the aspect of who has what responsibility, what role they play, and how do you govern that network. Even the example that in this network, even system administrators do not have access to the things that you need. So I think it's basically how you build the network, how you set the governance is important. The fourth important point is common standards are common sense, which means we imagine how internet emerged, right? So there were intranets in many organizations, and those intranets were having certain standards, and then those intranets started talking to each other, and then they thought, oh, we need to have some common standards across all of them. So imagine those TCP/IP and those standards have emerged. In the same kind of phenomenon, we will have blockchain networks, individual networks now, small networks, private networks, and there will be time when these networks will be talking to each other. So for example, we have working with the Decentralized Identity Foundation, DIF, to create a DID, common decentralized identifier, which is understanding the identities in blockchain versus identities in non-blockchain systems. How can they talk to each other and understand each other? So I think examples like that for common standards using W3C Foundation. Privacy is paramount as we live in all today's world. The GDPR, the California Consumer Privacy Act, now LGPD in Brazil, many of those consumer privacy acts and consumer privacy regulations are there. So we need to keep the privacy intact. And there's a way to do that, because people ask the question that if I'm on blockchain, my information is publicly available. How do we manage that? There's a way that how can we safeguard the public information on not putting it into the system, but keeping in a shadow ledger, or maybe a ledger that may be part of this. So I'm 3 minutes over, so I understand that aspect. So I think this is my last slide. So I think after this, I would open it up for questions. So Dr. Bapna, I think to you.
Thank you, Dr. Arun. And this was very, very informative on blockchain as a social force for social good. We have one question, and this is from Akash Dania from Delaware State University. And this deals with the single ledger system, where we assume there's going to be transparency in the entire supply chain. But there are challenges with economies globally that have these parallel economies, primarily for tax evasion purposes. Are there any solutions that experts have come around for this issue?
Right. So I think this is a very, very good, I think, question in terms of, I think, challenges that we look at. So I think the days, I would start with, I think, I will answer your question, but I think I would like to share an example that why do we not see cryptocurrency as a global currency today? Think of that as one of the example to your question. And I think that might answer some of the things, because each country has or would like to have, or their governments would like to have control over their currency. I think the valuation of their currency. And that's one of the primary reasons that we haven't seen this technology to be used in those kind of environments where cryptocurrency is accepted globally. And because they will see their country's value may be demonetized. I think that's one of the bigger aspects. And that basically creates some of the challenges in terms of taxations and other things. However, international trade is one of the example, and we have been able to find how do we have taxation or tax implications applied into the economy, right? So I think as we look at that aspect, however, there's a way to look at blockchain technology to help us enable from creating the international taxes through the system using blockchain technology that we can enable. And those would be, I think, concept of smart contract. I know we haven't talked about in this presentation a lot of the details, but the smart contract would be a simple example. So I think if you are having a global trade, you are abiding by a transaction between the two organizations and entities. And as part of that, you have standard rules and regulations that are coded as a smart contract. The smart contract can be kicked in as part of the blockchain technology to enable that transaction, even if you are part of the global economy. So I think that's one of the example I would see can be applied. However, I think keep in mind those other challenges I mentioned to you is related to the global adoption of cryptocurrency and other things. So there are other things beyond our control and beyond, I think, what governments would like to have control over that are inhibiting us to create that complete trust and transparency. Other question, Dr. Bhatt?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for this. And let's open this up for everybody. If there are any more questions, please type those. But in the meanwhile, I would want to ask you, we still haven't seen a widespread adoption of blockchain.
Mhm.
Uh, Not yet. And
Right.
what are the reasons for that? Is it standards? You had mentioned standards. Is it
Right.
uh, s- scalability? What exactly is happening
Right.
here?
So I think there are multiple aspects, but I think I would start with one of the things. So technology will keep evolving, and imagine the same thing that how we started the internet journey, right? Imagine, did we have the TCP/IP version on day one? Probably not. We had the internet standards early on, and then we came to TCP/IP. So I think there will be, and then the number of transactions that you could do on internet, right? In back in the days, right? So it was depending on the bandwidth, right? Imagine even the storage capacity that we had in the systems early days. So technology will be evolving. We will be there. Today, people ask that, is that a scalability challenge? As I mentioned, technology is evolving. People are having different ways. How much trust and security you want to have in the system, based on that, you will have stringent rules and regulations applied to your technology for transactions. And that will drive the behavior for number of transactions you can perform on blockchain. So I can say with all the full-fledged capabilities that we can drive hundreds of thousands of transactions per second. But people ask that, can I do millions or billions of transactions today using the all trusted capabilities on blockchain network? Answer is no. So that's one aspect to your question. And then second thing you mentioned is that standard there. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not about the technology here. It's about the trust and transparency again. I don't know, our businesses, government entities, other organizations are ready to accept this, that we can be completely trusted, we can be completely transparent, and in many cases we cannot be. So I think that's one of the bigger challenges that we have for our businesses, that they do not want to be transparent. Maybe that's how their business is, to keep that unique differentiator, the unique value they have, and keeping it separate, isolated, and build onto that. And that's how they are surviving. So there are multiple aspects of those things as well, that organizations, business or government, do not want to come to that trusted and transparent environment. That's the biggest inhibitor for us for the blockchain usage. It's not about the technology. Technology will be evolving. We might have millions or billions of transactions one day on blockchain, I have no doubt, but it's something else today.
Thank you. I will, if there are any, I did not see any other questions coming in.
I have a
I believe
question.
one question did come in, and this is from Dr. Zaveri from Morgan State University. As transactions occur, the size of the block increases. What's going to be the implications on data storage? Example, move to clouds, as most organizations are doing. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. So I think one of the thing is that, as I mentioned, that blockchain, we have to think, I know we didn't get into the technical details. Blockchain is not a solution for big data. So I think one thing that we have to keep in mind, we do not have to keep every information, all the things onto the blockchain. What I meant by that is, for example, let's say even the supply chain we have talked about. Imagine there are 30 different supply chain network participants. And if they put all the information they track, if they put everything they do on blockchain, it will be terabytes of data in every transactions across the things, because they are tracking high resolution images, maybe some other bill of lading, maybe other freight forwarders information, maybe the customs records, the other records. So I think it will be very, very challenging. As I think your question is very right. How do we manage this is the example. So what we are doing here is only putting the information on blockchain that requires you to ensure the trust and transparency in the system. So you can create the crypto anchor, or basically a cryptographic information of a record, or maybe the information that you have. For example, if I have a photo image, you can create a hash of that image, and you put that hash onto the blockchain network rather than putting the entire 45 meg of a high resolution photo or image, right? You can create a hash of that to the blockchain network. So I think that way, if there's anything changes in that image, you can verify with that hash, and you can ensure if it's the same image or not. So that's how you can verify. But the suggestion that we have been telling to all of our businesses, and that's how we are managing these larger supply chain, is putting the information that's not necessary to be put on blockchain and managing the blockchain technology records to be lighter as much as possible, because this is not a solution for big data. It's just a solution for helping us to bring trust and transparency into our systems. So that's one way that we can do it. Even when we are looking at, people would like to say, hey, I would like to keep all of my information onto the blockchain. Either it's related to my identity information and records. And there are some things based on, I think, as you can see the number 5 on this chart, privacy aspects. So we suggest our government and businesses to keep that private information about the individuals onto the shadow ledgers, or to a system where they need to keep it private, and then only put the information that's pertinent to a transaction or record related to individual's identity and information. You don't have to put all the information onto the blockchain, and maybe you don't even have to put the actual information. So for example, simple thing, people ask that that verify that you are age older 21 to have an alcohol consumption. What do we do? We show our driver's license. You don't need to, because he's just asking, are you age 21 or not? If someone, you can provide that information from some authority that yes, you are, that's the only thing they are looking at from a trusted source. So you can share that information onto the blockchain, that there's an eligibility information available for you to see on blockchain. That's what they need to say. They don't need to see on your driver's license your name, age, your color of your eyes, and color of your hair. They don't need to see all of that. So that's how we manage the information, what we need to put on blockchain and what we need to keep up.
Thank you very much. Since there are no more questions.
No, there's one more question, Sanjay.
Okay.
Felix Ayadi.
Yes, Felix has asked a question. Do you think developing countries in Africa can maximize the benefits of cryptocurrencies, given that the cost of mining in electricity cost exceeds the benefits?
Right. So I think this is one of the other aspects that how we see the cryptocurrency usage in the different organizations, different countries. But I think just to answer, that's one of the inhibitors that we all see, that how valuable cryptocurrency would be given its consumption of the technology, right? And then I think, as I mentioned, there's the level of trust you can bring into the system, the level of capabilities that you can bring into the blockchain technology. And given that requirement, we can manage the kind of, you can say, mining efforts might be needed. So I think that's one way to do it, but I think still that's a challenge. Wish I had a better solution for that. It would be a challenge, as we see, I think, mining consumption of the compute power to ensure the authenticity and the finding out the true value of those transactions. So I think that's going to be a challenge, and that's how one of the inhibitor we see in the cryptocurrency usage and adoption in global economy. So I think that's my answer as of now. But yes, there are ways that if we are looking at, again, wish there would be a way to create for those countries where they are not having, I think, or underserved from financial perspective, communities and countries, and we could look for something different for that local region, right? And how can we create these kind of new systems that may be a little bit more, you can say, specific to those countries and regions, and not having to look at all the aspects that we have been doing from the global perspective. And I think using global systems or global technologies that we have been knowing in terms of security, privacy, and all the elements that require the different compute power, different knowledge, different systems. And I think that has to be you can say, a balance in between, that if I'm looking for something social good, the information that I'm collecting, how much and what kind of things I need to do, and how can I do the verification, how can I do my algorithms to that apply. So I think there are different ways to do that, but wish there would be a better way to achieve that as of now. But yeah, I think technology gurus are thinking of advancing that challenge that we all have. How can we be effective and more efficient in terms of our mining, and reducing more power consumption, more compute power in general. So I think those efforts are in place, but I think we are not there yet.
Thank you. It's 1 o'clock, so Dr. Emdad, over
Yeah.
to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Bhatna, for the Q&A session. And I want to, on behalf of all of us, my colleagues here at Morgan, and also throughout the HPC community who were part of this webinar, want to thank Dr. Arun for a very insightful presentation. And we appreciate that you gave us your time and made the presentation. At this point, we want to ask our attendees to join us as they leave. They can vote on this webinar, how they liked it, and as they leave, so that we can communicate that with Jay. Thank you again. With that, I want to say goodbye, and we see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And be safe. Bye-bye.